Good morning. Going to go over the muscular system and just how it's all kind of put together and how your muscles actually kind of move. So a little bit more on the differences between the different types of muscles. So, all right, so you have 3 different types of muscle tissue, one being skeletal muscle. And so probably the more well-known of all the muscle types. And so this particular muscle type is going to be attached to your bone. So it's going to attach to your bone by a tendon, which is a bunch of connective tissue. There's a bunch of connective tissue that comes before the tendon, so kind of between the muscle and the tendon. It's called the fascia. It's kind of this whiter tissue. So eventually it becomes the tendon, but it's actually, I mean, as it's closer to the muscle itself, it's actually called the fascia. And it's your tendon that will attach to the periosteum of your bone. So your muscle is going to be made out of many different little fascicles, kind of the fiber-like structures. And because you need to be able to control your muscle movement, and because it needs to move, your muscles are going to have nerves and blood vessels running parallel to it to give it that stimulation to tell it to move, or to give it the oxygen that it needs to be able to convert to control the cellular respiration part. So all right. So now you've got skeletal muscles. They are going to have more than one nucleus, so we call them multinucleated. A couple of different parts. They technically have a cell membrane, but we call it the sarcolemma. Okay? And then the cytoplasm of a muscle fiber is called the sarcoplasm instead of the cytoplasm. All right. Each muscle fiber can then be broken down into the individual myofibrils. And these are going to be bunches of either actin, well, probably actin and myosin. Not going to be just actin or just myosin. So, and that you should be able to tell on your, what's it called? The diagrams that you did, the very front part. So you can kind of see here, here's your sarcolemma, the outside, the cell membrane. Okay, so each one of these is the fibers. And then you have the individual myofilaments. That's what your muscle fiber is a whole bunch of myofibrils. Then if you were to take apart these myofibrils, you'll get your myofilaments, which is going to be bunches of actin and myosin. So, and then the fascia is going to be extending off of that sarcolemma, your cell membrane here, and it's going to taper into your tendon, which attaches to the bone there. So in terms of movement for your skeletal muscle, these muscle fibrils contain functional units called sarcomeres. They're usually like rectangular shaped, just chunks. So when we talk about functional units, we just mean the smallest unit of an organ, the smallest part. It's not necessarily a cell because it might be several cell types or tissue types working together. So the sarcomere is what's going to actually initiate that contracting. So your muscle can contract so you can move. Your actin or myosin, since they are the myofibrils, they are going to, since they have that, they're going to look like they're that they've got lines running through those particular types of muscles. So I guess I should also say, depending on how you cut it, you might have noticed it on meat that you eat. But it depends on the cut, because if it's cut perpendicularly to the striations, then you wouldn't necessarily see the striations. So we've got the functional unit, but then you have to include the motor unit also, which is going to include the nerves that are going to be attached to your muscle fibers. So your functional unit is just what allows the muscle fiber to contract, and then your motor unit is also including the thing that's triggering or stimulating your muscle to move. If you've got a large motor unit, you're going to have lots of different muscle fibers that are going to control those movements. So like your leg and your arms. But your smaller motor units are going to contain only a couple of different fibers, and those will control your fine motor movement, so like your fingers grasping. But moving your arm, that's a big set of units to be able to move your arm. Lots of muscles and nerves have to be initiated for you to move your arm, but not as many to move your finger. So there's a lot on your skeletal muscle, by the way. Your muscle fibers can only store small amounts of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. This is the energy currency for your cells. They can only store small amounts of ATP. So basically, as they almost have to make it as they use it, since they don't store it, really. So the most efficient way to do that is for every single muscle fiber to be able to go through that process of cellular respiration to make their own ATP, so they don't rely on somebody else making it and shipping it to them. They can't. No other cell can create enough to where they can store it. They won't be able to make enough to be able to store it. They don't have enough space. So, and if they gave away what little ATP they made, they wouldn't have enough to function themselves. So this is also the reason why muscular tissue is so vascular, meaning it's got lots of blood vessels, because you need all those blood vessels to be able to bring that oxygen and the nutrients that are necessary for cellular respiration. All right, moving on. So now we've got smooth muscle movement. These guys aren't going to look to be layered or stringy or whatever you want to call it, like your skeletal muscles. They're not going to appear lined. Because they're smooth. Go figure. They contract as one big muscle rather than being able to isolate the different parts. So it acts as one big unit. While we can control our skeletal muscle movement, we consider that voluntary. We cannot control our involuntary muscle movement. and that is the smooth muscle. It's all movement through involuntary means. So you can't consciously control it, I guess I should say. Because of that, it's going to be a little bit slower than your skeletal muscle. Your skeletal muscle contractions are almost instantaneous. Think about it. If you're like, I want to move my arm, you can move it. It doesn't really take any processing time. So that's one disadvantage to these guys. So it does take longer. However, on the flip side, they're also able to maintain a contraction a little bit longer. They're able to stay contracted longer than your typical skeletal muscle. So your muscles that line the inside of your bladder, that line the inside of your esophagus or your intestines, all of those are going to be smooth muscle. We don't control them, but you need it because you have to be able to move urine through you, or to be able to close off the bladder. You have to have that smooth muscle lining the inside of your bladder, so you can, number one, you can expand, but also so you can keep the bladder closed. We have some control over that kind of a muscle, but and then like the inside of your intestines need to be involuntary. You don't have to think about digesting your food and pushing it through your digestive system. So that's one reason why smooth muscle tissue is a good thing there. So they can also be so that single unit where they're just in charge of that one, or they can be multi-unit where the muscle needs some stimulation. We just don't control it, but it needs to be stimulated. So the iris in your eye needs to be stimulated by light in order to contract. When there's not a lot of light, that muscle relaxes and the pupil dilates, so there's your pupil's larger to allow more light in since it's dark. Your blood vessels oftentimes need stimulation to contract, usually by temperature or something like that. Your cardiac muscles, these guys are going to appear striated, so you're going to have those layers, or those lines, I guess. These fibers are going to be interconnected, so they're going to be laced together, if you will. They're obviously, because this is one of the most important tissues, or the most important muscle in our body, you're going to need lots of mitochondria. This particular muscle never takes a break. When it takes a break, you die. So obviously you don't want it to take a break because that would be bad. This one is also going to be involuntary, which is a good thing. We wouldn't want to have to think about controlling our heart rate all the time. So it's not going to be stimulated by anything. It's just self-stimulating. They've done tests, I know, where they have this method of being able to communicate with each other by not necessarily even touching, because they've done things where they've taken like 2 different beating heart cells, and they are beating at separate rates, and then the closer they get, and then they put them really, really close together, and then all of a sudden they start beating together as one.
at the same contraction rate. So it's actually kind of neat. A neat thing, a neat organ, I guess, something that we still don't quite fully understand. So, but it's still neat, I think. So, all right, so that kind of wraps that up. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Otherwise, have a great day.